Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. Yes, we're crusading through the Haydn symphonies. We're up to Symphony No. 71 in B-flat major. Doesn't that tell you a lot? Well, here's the thing. I was a little bit afraid of this symphony. It's a prime number, first of all, and they're always a little scary. But number 70 is like a flaming masterpiece. Number 72 is the companion to the horn signal symphony. It's got all kinds of crazy writing for a quartet of French horns. It's marvelous. Number 73 is La Chasse, the Hunt, which is a famous nickname symphony. And number 71 is just poor old Symphony Number 71 in B-flat major. And these symphonies like that come between more famous symphonies, you wonder why they're not known or why they're not more popular. And no one talks about Symphony Number 71. I mean, nobody has anything to say about it. It's really kind of astonishing. And so I listened to it, and I was saying to myself, what am I going to do with this thing? Maybe it's one of his less inspired ones. He was working on operas at the time. He was busy doing other things. And then I listened to it and ooh, baby, wow, look at this. What a nifty piece. What an incredible piece in some respects. But that's true of all of these. That's what happens. That's what happens when you listen. You actually listen to the music, and it's stunning. It's always full of imagination and creativity and novelty. There's an aspect of Haydn's melodic gift which is so modern sounding. I mean, the funny thing, it's almost alarming because, he was working in the classical period, and most of his tunes will cadence. That is, they'll have an ending. And the ending is often very conventional in classical works because it has to reassert the home key. But before you get to that point, all kinds of nifty stuff can happen. And much more than in Mozart or even Beethoven, Haydn's tunes traverse the universe before finally settling where you expect them to. And that moment when they come and settle is a little disconcerting, because before then you've been on this amazing journey. And all of a sudden you're sort of back where you're expected to be. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we are, aren't we? Nobody else quite approaches the writing of melodies and handling tonality the way Haydn does. Nobody does. And you have to remember, when we talk about things like sonata form and all that, we've categorized and defined it really very, very specifically in this series of talks and in other talks about other composers. Haydn didn't know any of that because he was inventing it. He just did what he did. And it was only 100 years later that people started to create categories based not on Haydn's practice, but on Beethoven's, particularly in his piano sonatas. So Haydn knew nothing of what sonata form was. He just knew what he was doing. And what he was doing revolutionized all subsequent music. I mean, it's just that simple. But Symphony No. 71 is part of that process. And as part of that process, it has its own special story to tell. It is a symphony chock full of personality and incredibly tightly written. At first I listened to it. You listen to these things and you say, oh, I don't hear anything related to anything else particularly. But then you listen to it a couple more times and you go, oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's what happens in this symphony. This is a symphony, if it's about anything, it's about light and shade. The way I describe these kinds of works by Haydn, and there's a whole bunch of them, is just that, light and shade. In other words, Mozart writes his G minor symphony. Everyone says it's tragic. It's sad. I mean, it has its cheery moments, but it's sad. Beethoven writes the Fifth Symphony. It's about fate and all that stuff. And it's very clear about, the trajectory in which it's moving, because both composers hang out in their respective keys much longer than Haydn does. Haydn is Tovey, the great British musicologist, nailed it when he said Haydn is a composer with a great love of big, bold contrasts working on a very small scale. And in this respect, he's quite similar to one of his mentors, C.P.E. Bach, who he admired tremendously, and whose goal was to pack as many emotions into the smallest possible space, even if they're only for a few seconds each. The result can sound marvelously disruptive or completely incoherent, depending on your perspective. Haydn did not go quite to that degree. Haydn's music is always coherent. It's the coherence imposed on C.P.E. Bach's range of emotions that makes Haydn so marvelous, that makes his music so powerful and expressive. And this symphony is a particularly good example of that because it's in B-flat major. It's scored for 1 flute, 2 oboes, 1 bassoon, 2 horns, and strings. It is it's like, well, let me give you an analogy. If you're sitting outside on a sunny day, and it's a beautiful day, and the breezes are wafting, and the birdies are singing, and it's just idyllic. You can write something that's idyllic musically, and it will be lovely. And we have a sort of a view of the classical period generally as an idyllic period. Its language was that of comic opera. The music is generally happy. Things in sad minor keys are few and far between. And that makes it difficult for some of us to try and understand or conceptualize the expressive range of the music, the emotions that it expresses. But on the other hand, if you're sitting out in that same gorgeous day, it's idyllic, the breezes are wafting, the birds are singing, maybe you're having a picnic, and suddenly a cloud passes over the sun, and everything is shadowed, and it passes. And then for a moment, there's a chill in the air, and it passes, and the sun comes back out, and everything is charming as it was before you started, before the cloud appeared. And then another cloud comes by. What does that do? It makes you appreciate the sunny bits all the more, and it gives you contrast. It gives you a moment of coolness, a moment of something else. There are other things working, a sense of the forces of nature, the power behind all that. I know this is a ridiculously extended metaphor, but that's what Haydn often does. And he's really kind of unique among composers in doing it that way, in presenting his darker emotions in the context of what is generally pretty lovely and idyllic and terrific. And this symphony does that. It does it particularly well, and in a very, very strong and powerful way. And what surprises me is that nobody has noticed, because it's just Symphony No. 71 in B-flat major, and no one pays attention to it. But when you do pay attention to it, you find that it's a work of astonishing depth, really, and with fascinating material that Haydn uses to construct the entire work. And I'm going to tell you how he does it. So we're going to get to it now. I've been talking for like 8 minutes about this unknown symphony, and we haven't heard any music. So I want to start with the introduction. Let's do the introduction to the first movement, because the first movement begins with a slow introduction, which in itself in this period is quite rare. Haydn would later make a habit of it in his London symphonies, but until then, slow introductions were fewer and further between. And this is not a long one. Here, let's listen to it. Let's just listen to the introduction. That was Adam Fischer with the what's it called? The Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra on Nimbus. And as usual, in those opening phrases, he uses solo violins for the contrasting theme, which drives me crazy because it's wrong. It's not what Haydn wrote. He wanted the full violin section playing quietly, not 2 solo violins, but that's Fischer's affectation, and we've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again in a little bit. But anyway, what did you notice about that introduction? Why does Haydn even bother to write an introduction? It's a really interesting question. Have you ever thought about it? Sometimes Haydn's introductions foreshadow what is to come. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're simply contrasting for various reasons. In this particular case, the introduction gives us the basic concept of the entire symphony. And that concept is a loud thing followed by a soft thing, followed by a loud thing, followed by a soft thing, and then a phrase that just ends it. Why does he do that? He's doing it because he wants to establish a pattern. The pattern is, like I said, loud, soft, loud, soft. That's the pattern. And once he's established that pattern, once he's got it into your head, everything that comes after in this symphony, everything that sounds like a loud statement followed by a quiet answer, question, answer, call, response, everything that you hear is going to relate back to that introduction, and it's all going to sound very coherent, as it's all related in the way that the themes are constructed. The other element in this introduction is that the phrases of the actual tune end with two notes. I don't know how it goes. Bump, bump. And the answer is two little notes, two short notes. You will find that practically every single melody in this symphony is made up of phrases that end with two short notes. And again, that gives the entire symphony this feeling of togetherness, of being written in one breath. And so the introduction is crucially important, and I'm going to play it for you again. So here is the introduction. So you heard what I was talking about. You have the pattern stretched out over time, and you have the little two-note endings to the various phrases. Doesn't matter what comes before. What matters is how they end. And mostly they're very short. Sometimes the two notes are two repeated notes. Chunk, chunk, instead of chunk, chunk. But it doesn't matter. As long as you've got those little two-note sniglets, you are in business as far as the symphony is concerned. Now, there will be more. But for now, that's all you need to hear. And I'm going to play you the entire exposition of the first movement. Pay particular attention to the second subject, which we will pay a little bit more, give a little bit more love to in a moment. But listen to the opening. Listen to the first theme, which is built up of little two-note sniglets. It's really kind of cool how Haydn, you're not conscious of it, let's put it that way. But when you know, when you listen and you think about it, all of a sudden it just becomes like it's a highlighter. Everything all of a sudden becomes related. It's just marvelous. So here it is, the exposition. Did you notice the second subject? The second subject has nothing to do with little two-note sniglets. The second subject is a harmonic pile-up based on a repeated note phraselet. Dun, dun, dun. Never mind, I'm not going to groan it out for you. Let's listen to the second subject separately. Here it is. Isn't that remarkable? Where is it going? What is it? You know, in so many of these symphonies, I've told you that the motion music is so interesting in taking you from the first subject to the second. And often it veers off into strange harmonic pathways. You know, it lets us feel that we've really been on a journey by the time the second subject arrives. But the second subject, if it's one that's very firmly grounded in a new key, will be introduced by motion music that's been all over the place. Here, there's barely any. Haydn just whips us into what's supposed to be the new key, and then the second subject itself is this mysterious harmonic journey. Really an extraordinary passage, and wonderful things will happen to it in the recapitulation. So, and that's what I mean by light and shade. I mean, that is not a typical second theme in a symphony. It's not even a tune. It's an atmosphere. It's a vision. It's a built up something or other that's otherworldly. And Haydn does that. He does that quite frequently. So that's the exposition. And now what I would like you to hear is the development section and the lead into the recapitulation. Because the recapitulation is also quite astonishing in that the first subject is barely present. The motion music is non-existent. It just immediately goes into that weird second subject with the harmonies made even more mysterious than ever before. And then the rest of the movement is coda. It's just a wrap-up that reasserts, finally, B-flat major, which is our home base, the key which this whole thing began. Listen to this development section and listen to what I term light and shade. It has remarkable depth and surprise and astonishing turbulence in places. Here is the development section leading into the recapitulation up to the coda. that remarkable? You know, people talk about works like Mozart's Dissonance String Quartet with its strange pileup of harmonies in the introduction to the first movement. Well, I mean, that's no odder than this. I mean, this is equally interesting in many respects, and equally dissonant in places. It really is, and you feel, you see, you hear those clouds passing before the sun, and then everything clears up, and then there's another wave, and then it clears up. Finally, it's going to clear up, but until we get there, it's wave after wave of mystery and astonishment in what is basically a very pleasant, enjoyable, tuneful piece of music. And that's Haydn. I mean, that's his essence in so many ways. So that's the first movement, and it's already been pretty extraordinary. If you've remembered the loud, soft thing from the introduction, if the little two-note phrasey things, the second subject, that's a lot of material, a lot of distinctive material. Now, the second movement is a theme and variations, and we don't have to make a meal out of the variations. You just have to know the theme, and I'm going to play you the theme. Remember little phrases ending with two notes, because that, my friends, is what this the first part of the theme anyway, the first half is built out of. You'll hear it immediately, and Haydn makes sure you notice. The opening phrases are broken by pauses. So there's a phrase, and then there's a pause, and it's yeah, da da dum bum. So you go, oh yeah, sure. It's got those little two-note ending things, right? And then as the melody continues on its way, there's this wonderful harmonic cloud, similar to what we heard in the second subject of the first movement, that comes over the music and just, it gives it just immeasurable depth. And well, I'm just going to play the melody. You'll hear exactly what's going on. And then you can listen to the variations and see how Haydn handles these various elements and plays with them to our unbelievably extreme delight. Here is the opening of the Andante. It's an Andante, isn't it? Adagio, pardon me. Slow movement. Quite slow. Adagio. Yeah, so isn't that nifty? And that's the second movement. And you can listen to the different variations and see what happens with the harmonic cloud, with the little two-note sniglets and all that stuff. The third movement is a minuet with a trio section. The minuet proper is built entirely of little tiny phrases with those short little two-note endings. It really is, it's totally obsessive, but it's done in such a creative way. That is, the melody itself is so full of sort of catchy rhythms, and you don't even notice that that it's not like you're looking at something mechanical. It's not mechanical. It's totally spontaneous and dance-like, but it's built out of those familiar elements, and it also has that call and response quality to it, a loud opening with a soft response, that we heard in the introduction. It really is, I don't know, the more I listen to this music, the more it just blows me away. Here's the whole minuet from beginning to end without repeats. Now, the middle section of the minuet, the trio, is a delicious dance tune for 2 solo violins and pizzicato string accompaniment. And what makes me absolutely nuts about the way Fischer plays these things is that Haydn really wants 2 solo violins here, but he would have done it anyway. So he's ruining one of Haydn's most powerful means of contrast, the opposition between solo and tutti, or the full ensemble. When Haydn wants a solo, he tells us. If he doesn't want a solo, he doesn't need any help. I'm just going to leave it at that. And now we'll listen to the whole trio, which is also based on phrases with 2-note sniglets, although the accent is different. And the phrase rhythm is different too. Phrase rhythm means how many bars. I mean, this trio has it's like 7 bars and then 9 bars. It's odd numbered phrasing, which makes all of the phrases sound like they're either too short or a little too long. It's deliciously tipsy. It has a little bit of a, had one too many feel to it. But listen for those phrases with the 2 little notes at the end. There's lots of them in this trio as well, but they're used in a completely different way because the accents are different. It's like 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Well, never mind. I'm not going to do it. You'll listen to it. You'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. Here is the trio section. Yummy! Now, the finale. The finale. The finale is going to do everything that we've come to know so far, but in a totally light and wonderful way. And I can't emphasize strongly enough the fact that in these finales, what Haydn manages to do is sum up the entire journey that we've taken so far, while also giving the finale all of its own independent material. He doesn't have to repeat themes, but sometimes he does. And here he does. He does in the most marvelous, fabulous way. But to begin with, we need to listen just to the finale, which is in monothematic sonata form, by the way. In other words, everything is based on the opening tune. The second subject is based on the opening tune. It's the same thing, it just evolves rather than having to change completely or introducing new material. And there's a reason why it's monothematic. It's a very, 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 very good reason that's going to just blow your mind. So let's listen to the exposition, the whole opening, and pay attention, by the way, to the exchanges between the full orchestra and the oboes. Call and response, question and answer. You'll hear it like that, It's again, recalling that wonderful introduction. So here is the exposition of the finale. But that's not the best part. Damn it. The best part is, remember the second subject from the first movement? That strange harmonic cloud, that amazing pile-up of harmonies? Well, guess what shows up in the development section of the finale? It's not exactly the same because the meter isn't exactly the same. And then, in the second subject of the first movement, it's 3-note things that pile up. In the finale, it's 4-note things that pile up. But what matters is that they pile up. So I'm going to play you the development section of this marvelous finale, and you will hear how it gradually morphs into that second subject, or a recollection of that second subject. It's not absolutely identical. Nothing in Haydn ever is. But it's clearly the same process happening. And oh, what a surprise and what a wonderful contrast of light and shade it introduces into this otherwise very sunny finale. Here it is. Unbelievable, isn't it? Doesn't it make you just want to go have a drink or something? I don't know. People say that cyclical form didn't happen until much later, until Beethoven, Brahms, later Romantics, Mendelssohn and Schumann. No, my friends. Haydn was doing it way before they were. It's just that nobody was paying attention, which just astonishes me. But we are paying attention, and all of this that we've been talking about, all of these wonderful expressive contrasts, the light and shade, the special, emotional ambience, which is really uniquely Haydn's, the fantastic way of unifying a 4-movement cycle of movements into a one grand statement, as in this symphony. All of this is happening in a completely forgotten work, a work that is universally, to the extent it's talked about at all, it's usually dismissed as something that happened when Haydn was busy doing other things. And here it is. It shows such craft, such intelligence, such genius, such wit, such emotional contrast. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And it's just Symphony number 71 in B-flat major. You could knock me over with a pin when I finally sat down and gave this symphony the attention that it deserved. And I hope you do too. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep on listening, friends. Take care.